Hi, everyone. Welcome to the GoldFish Report. I'm your host, Louisa, and this is our weekly Country Roads with Winston Shrout. And today is December 22nd, 2017. And welcome, Winston, for a Friday. How are you today?
Well, pretty good. We just went through the winter solstice, which is the longest night. Of course, I had to get up early, so it didn't really affect me that much. But anyway, we're heading toward the light now. So that's always a good feeling.
Absolutely. And today we're going to be talking about the development of the financial system. And before we get into that, I just have a couple of announcements for our viewers. Since Monday is Christmas, there will be no POTUS report on Monday, but there will be on Tuesday. So you can look for that. We also want to let our viewers know that there will be a top 10 news story. There may be two that we're doing, but one we'll be doing a little closer towards the end of the year, kind of in review. But there's a top 10 news story that I produced with Jim Fetzer, Dr. Jim Fetzer, and that will also be released probably this weekend. And I also wanted to, as Winston said, wish everybody a happy winter. And I think we're at the point of no return. So much going on in the world, new executive orders, taking assets of human rights violators from the president. And so this is very interesting. And so it's going to be interesting to tie this in today with what the topic is that Winston's going to be discussing. So let's see, I think that's it for my announcement. So the history of money, where did it all start, Winston?
Well, before we get started on something as serious as that, I thought maybe we might have a little bit of humor.
That's good. Let's start with some humor. I like humor.
Yeah, well,
But you are warned. You do know better.
This is entitled "How to Start a Fight." So anyway, there's about three or four little situations here that might start a fight. Anyway, the first one says, one year I decided to buy my mother-in-law a cemetery plot as a Christmas gift.
What a good idea.
The next year, I didn't buy her a gift. When she asked me why, I replied, well, you still haven't used the gift I bought you last year.
Yeah, I like that one.
and that's how the fight started.
That's how the fight started.
This next one says,
I like that one.
Says my wife and I were sitting at a table at her high school reunion, and she kept staring at a drunken man swigging his drink as he sat alone at a nearby table. I asked her, do you know him? Yes, she sighed. He's my old boyfriend. I understand he took to drinking right after we split up those many years ago, and I hear he hasn't been sober since. My God, I said, who would think a person could go on celebrating that long? And then the fight started.
The fight started. It's pretty funny, Winston.
Yeah.
First one's still my favorite.
Yeah.
But let's keep going.
The second says, my wife sat down next to me as I was flipping through the channel. She asked, what's on TV? I said, dust. And then the fight started. Says my wife was hinting about what she wanted for our upcoming anniversary. She said, I want something shiny that goes from 0 to 165 in about 2 seconds. I bought her a bathroom scale. And then the fight started.
I bought her a bathroom scale.
All right, here's the last one.
Good one. No, they're good. They're good.
It says my wife was standing nude, looking in the bedroom mirror. She was not happy with what she saw, and she said to me, I feel horrible. I look old, fat, and ugly. I really need you to pay me a compliment. I replied, your eyesight's damn near perfect. And then the fight started.
funny, Winston? Thanks. It's pretty good. That's good. Those are good, Winston. I'm glad you're not giving me more riddles. That's good. Well, thanks for starting things out on a really, really fun and good, positive, vibration with laughter. Because there's
Yeah, I
no
thought we
better.
started out with a little bit of a laugh, get people's blood going a little bit, because the subject matter we're going to go in today, it's going to have to be just a little bit intense to get through it all. But in any event, it's always good to start things out with a little chuckle, with a little bit of humor.
Well,
Hey,
it's
if you
because there's
can't laugh, you can't do much.
well, I mean, it's only funny because there's a little bit of truth in all of it. That's what makes it so funny. All right, Winston, next week you're going to put me to the challenge now. So
Okay.
I'm gonna have to remember the comic. It used to be the Lockhorns. Do you remember that?
Uh,
Lockhorns used to be in the Sunday papers before we had internet.
that must be it. I don't remember that particular one.
I must be a dinosaur.
Oh, I think
The Lockhorns, yeah. There was
yeah, I
this
think I do
couple.
remember some of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a couple, an older couple that always, it was always this kind of humor. This kind of. It was really funny. Thanks for
Well,
sharing that with me.
the thing about humor is that you can it's a surprise.
Right.
I mean your mind is drifting along at one thought process, and all of a sudden you take an immediate U-turn. And that's what causes the laughter. So anyway,
But you do
it's
it with a
good.
straight face, which makes that's what's important about the jokes is so that like I told someone a joke yesterday and
uh,
I ruined it. But it's because you have to have a straight face if you tell them this way they don't anticipate what you're going to say.
yeah.
Well, that's good.
All right. Well, let's get along here. Like I say, it's going to take us a little while to get through all this, but I think
Okay.
it'd be very good for people. Let's see now. Let me do the screen share, and we'll launch off into this.
Oh, and I just wanted to say to all of our viewers to thank you so much for your well wishes because they all knew Monday I was pretty sick. Actually, I'm still on the mend, but there were many loving and lovely viewers who sent me wishes to get well, and I just wanted to tell you thank you, love you so much. Thank you for caring and taking the time to put a comment in the comment section and wishing me well. So I think all of your wishes were heard, and finally I'm starting to get it's bronchitis, and so it's just horrible. Thank you for your wishes. So let's go on, Winston. What do we have here?
Okay, this article here, I don't know that you can find it on the internet. Uh, I've had it on my computer for a very long time, so I'm not really sure. I think it came from the what's called the Four Winds website, and I'm not sure they're still up and active. They were up and down a few times. Sometimes they would put up too much information and get blasted for it. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'm not, like I say, this article seems to be very accurate in most respects. There may be a few little things here or there, but it's very instructive, and that's why I've decided to run through it today. We've talked about some of these things in the past, but anyway, I wanted to run through this.
It said disclosure. What was that? That was just a notice or something.
Yeah, you won't be able to find it on the internet, I don't think. You might. Anyway, it's called The History of Banking. The proposition is, where did King Solomon's treasure go? And this is taken from an Asian perspective. Because we're going to get into the plan of the experts of 1928, but we have to build up to it so the people would see the rationale behind it. So this particular article here has that. So let's just move with it. Anyways, talking about the history of world banking, it says it started with King Solomon back in Jerusalem about 930 BC. A very successful king who amassed huge wealth, especially gold. Now, for people who have read the Old Testament and stuff, you know all about King Solomon. He was, of course, from the tribe of Judah, and he succeeded his father David on the throne. So he was quite an interesting, historical character in many respects. And well, we don't have time to go into all his history. Let me make sure I keep this as large as possible so people can read it. Anyway, considering he knows his country will fall apart after his death, and selects one of his most trusted wives. And as I point out, he had 600 wives, which I don't personally believe. But anyway, one of the trusted wives was Queen Shaba, or Balquish. Anyway, he selected her to protect assets, bloodline, and traditions. And sometime after that, she leaves, goes back to where she probably came from, which was Java. Now, for those, that's an ancient name. We would spell it Java today, Java. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's in the present location of what we call Indonesia, in Southeast Asia. Right. Anyway, it says there she established the courts of what later became known as Solo Java. And there she was safeguarding the assets of King Solomon's and his bloodline and the religious traditions of his court. As you recall, if you look at the Old Testament, there was a lot of criticism of Solomon because he was marrying foreign wives. As you understand, if you look back at the Israelitish tradition and history, the marriage restriction was actually within your own tribe. And so even though King Solomon was from the tribe of Judah, he was taking wives from various places on the planet, which is pretty interesting. Anyway, so she goes back, the gold piles up. There are huge flows of gold into Indonesia from China during the 1300 AD period. China almost goes broke buying spices and wood. And then from Europe in the 14 to 1600 AD, most of the gold taken from South America ends up in Indonesia as payment for spices, which are the most sought after goods in the world at that time. So he has a little diagram here showing Solo Java and then where the gold was coming from. So there's been a lot of work done on this particular article. So the royal Solo family ties are expanded to include Chinese royals. This is probably starting around 1000 AD. Now he gets into explanation of Knights Templars. Talks about the Knights, spent 9 years in Jerusalem exploring the ruins of King Solomon's temple. Says they discovered something that makes them very powerful once back in Europe, and I've explained some of that because there's other angles connected with the 9 original knights that excavated under King Solomon's temple. Anyway, Knights Templars get special privileges from the Pope, and the Knights Templar order is established with that direct access to the Pope. They quickly become the European protector of wealth and the pilgrims to Jerusalem. That leads to the establishment of the first working bank system throughout Europe. People of means can deposit their wealth with the Templar Knights and then draw from it once they are in the Holy Land. I think we talked about that.
Right, previously.
Yeah, gold certificates and so forth.
Right.
So this article here is just going through some of that. So in 1064 AD, they first established a connection with the old Solomon bloodline in Java. Mm-hmm. Then on Friday the 13th, 3007, Templars are now a very rich and powerful independent from church and state, European-wide organization. The French king, together with the Pope, has conspired to confiscate their assets, so that's what they did. Anyway, he's diagramming all this. The Templars are hunted down, jailed, and killed. Their assets and land holdings were confiscated. Of course, they escaped. As that had been mentioned, there's something like 20 some odd ships that left France, probably through Marseille, and went to other places on the planet. But anyway, it's interesting that as early as 1064 AD, they had already established a connection with the Solomon bloodline in Yahweh.
So this is
Okay.
what I'm sorry, just so I can interject here, that this is what the original purpose of the Templars was. And I think just recently, how interesting, right, that we have President Trump, who is supposed to be bringing in and introducing this real global currency reset, this new dollar, this new financial system. And he recently depicted with the Knights Templar cross on a horse. There's actually, the horse himself had like this blanket that had the cross on it, and then, you know, the rider had the cross on it. I don't know if that was how the Knights Templar
the red cross that you see that they display and wear certainly goes back to Rosicrucianism,
right.
Rosy Cross. So we have a lot of history of a lot of these things. Anyway, the Templars flee and hide in three main directions. One group goes into the mountains of Central Europe, what eventually becomes Switzerland. What does their flag look like?
Right, Switzerland has the red cross on it. Exactly.
Yeah. Now on the diagram over here, he shows where they actually went. One of the groups, this one arrow here points, didn't show, but it goes to Switzerland. The other arrow points to Scotland. So they went to Scotland under the protection of Robert the Bruce. And apparently some of them escaped westward, went through Spain, ended up in Portugal, and from Portugal they went to America.
Okay, I'm just going to ask if there's any way that we can minimize it looks like it's, the screen is very big, so we're only seeing a very tiny portion of it. I don't know if there's a way to, yeah, that would be much better. Okay, excellent.
Can you think they can read the words?
Yeah, now we could, but before it was a little big. This is perfect.
All right.
This should be perfect. Thank you.
So if you look over here on the left side, it talks about, you know, going through Spain and ended up in Portugal. From there, they launched and went to America. Well, as a matter of fact, the Knights Templars had been in America a long time before that. They were certainly in New England in the 13th century because they found old archaeological things, you know, that would indicate Knights Templars had actually been into New England in the early 1200s. And then also, I think on another report I'd mentioned that they had made it as far as the Uinta Mountains in northern Utah. So I don't want to go back over all that. Just pointing out, you know, now one of the things too, and I think I reported it previously, the word America. On their battle shields or whatever, they had depicted a star. Now that was the star that they had used to navigate to North America, and the name of that star they called America. So America means to America. In other words, they were following that star to what we now call North America. So that's where the word came from. It didn't come from that Americus Vespucci fella that everybody claims. Anyway, one group flees north and established a safe haven in northern Scotland, Scandinavia, while the third group went west, Portugal to America. From 14 to 1500 AD, Scottish Templars group leaves and travels all the way to Indonesia, where they set up a base at Madura. They unite with Solomon bloodline in Java. So on this diagram here, it has all these things. You can, you know what, if, like I say, you're going to have, maybe I could just send these particular articles I'm going to show today to you.
Yeah.
Then you can have them. And then, you know, if people would like to have a copy of this, they can either contact you or me.
Okay, sounds good. I can publish it on my blog.
Yeah, because I don't really think I can. I don't think the origin of this website, it may or may not be in existence any longer.
Yeah, no, we could publish all documents
Yeah,
on the
okay.
blog. That's not a problem.
Okay, so from 16 to 1700 AD, the Templars in Java, together with their brothers in the Alps, that would be Switzerland,
Right.
started issuing paper certificates backed by gold.
Ooh.
A
Sounds
piece of
familiar.
paper that represents a certain amount of gold can be easily moved and lent out. Interest is 2 to 3% per year payable in gold. Now we get into the problem. 17 to 1800 AD, one German banker backing a local prince quickly catches on to this and sees the huge potential. They eventually changed their name to Rothschild. Now, their original name, of course, was Bauer. Then they used the symbol, so they became known as Rothschild. Anyway, this Rothschild fella had 5 sons who were sent out across Europe to establish banks, one in each chosen country. They established in England, France, well, all over Europe, where they become the King's Bank, or as we now call them, central banks. First to be established of the central banks, or the King's Banks, was the Bank of England. Now, instead of lending English king gold bullion for use and paying for war efforts, they get the right, and only them, to issue papers representing that gold. So the deal that was made with through the Bank of England with the English king was not for gold. It was for paper that represented the gold.
Sound familiar?
Now, the king's loan will be run at 8% interest for eternity to be paid in gold. Okay, that's 8%. And up here we have what? 2 to 3%.
Right.
So
there's a spread.
Yeah, and this interest is to be paid in gold. It says there's no need to pay the principal since Rothschild, in his turn, borrowed gold certificates at an interest of 2 to 4% per year. He is on to a very good business. And I can't make this bigger. It says the only limit to their banking profits is the need for the king or the kings to borrow money. With a spread of 4 to 6% per annum or per year, it has huge potential. And now with his sons firmly established in all the important corners of Europe, the best way to make money is to make sure the kings go to war against each other, because the Rothschilds are going to finance it. Okay? So they win either way all the time. Then down here, there's a little small footnote you might not be able to see, but it says wars always generate huge profits and debts, both of which are of interest to the bankers. See how the USA debt has grown from zero in early 1900 when they installed the Fed to what it is now. Each big leap in debt, except the 1930 depression, is caused by a war. Okay, then it talks about Napoleon and all that. I think people are really familiar with that history. You don't need to go over that.
Well, there was a note saying that it all started with Napoleon. That's how they all figured that out.
Well, I'm not sure that's how they all figured it out, but
Well, I'm just reading what the
Napoleon
comment
is a good
was.
example of it.
Yeah, well, no, I was just reading the comment that was the last comment on that page, fire page. Okay.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that people may not know about Napoleon was he was in the Holy Bloodline. He was what's called a Merovingian. I think we talked a little bit about that history sometime past. But Napoleon, actually, he was obsessed with being a Merovingian. He thought that he had the right, because of his blood, perhaps, to do all the things that he did. So there was more to Napoleon than just being, a
Emperor.
warmonger.
Mm.
He actually was influenced, by his what he considered to be his bloodline. Now, whether he was or not, I don't know.
Well, that's why he
Anyway,
declared himself emperor, right?
yeah,
That's why Beethoven's Third Symphony, which was originally dedicated to him, was changed. And he took the dedication of his Third Symphony uh, the symphony after he declared himself emperor. So
yeah.
there's some more historical fact.
Wow, yeah, that's something I didn't know about.
Mhm.
Uh, anyway, this talks about here. I'll make it bigger so people can see it. Talks about the Battle of Waterloo, thanks to their superior. Now, talking about the Bowers or the Rothschilds, they had a Pony Express, I guess. Anyway, so they were able to get the news of the battle
Mm.
prior to anybody else, and so they were able to manipulate the market to their advantage because of their superior intelligence. Anyway, thanks to their superior networks, they knew before anyone else who won, and that alone put them in place to clean up on all the financial markets of their day. So anyway, they manipulated based on information and the loss at Waterloo. All right. Now we're going to get into a little bit more international. It says the Bank of China and Bank of Japan also eventually gets established by Asian counterparts. In an agreement signed in 1857, all Asian territories agreed to have the Bank of England oversee and control all macro banking aspects in their territories, and that agreement still stands. Down here again, we have the diagram showing, what the influence of Java and the original King Solomon gold.
Hmm. So that's why a lot of this is centered out of Indonesia even today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that.
Yeah.
It says the last central bank to be established was the Fed. The Americans resisted the central bank idea for the longest time, and it took a banking crisis together with some very long-term political gains to finally get them to accept the idea under the name of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. It has rightfully been called the crime of the century.
Mm-hmm.
The gold that ultimately backed all banks can be traced to a few major sources. The Chinese royal family tracing its roots back to Genghis Khan,
Right.
who conquered the world, having his subjects pay tribute in gold. Now, remember when we did that report on the Knights Templars and the Temple Protocol? It was Genghis Khan who helped to finance that effort because he wanted the Temple Protocols. So that's an interesting thing. You think, today we have, modern communications and everything, but it's interesting that even way back, all those centuries ago, how much international interaction was going on. Anyway, it says the Indonesians and their spices, plus Solomon's legacy, the Persians and other remnants of other ancient empires, the colonial powers of England, Spain, and Portugal collected lots, but they also spent on spices and exotic imports. I would suppose during those days that even as we have it today, many of the spices that they were requiring was for health or for healing. And so, that's perhaps, why everybody was so interested in Indonesia at that time, because they could produce all those things. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, payment was made in gold. And so, in other words, gold just kept flowing in and flowing in and flowing in. Okay, it says the Chinese always have very close ties with their Indonesian relatives. When mainland China goes through its upheavals in mid-1900, their assets are moved first to Taiwan. So the communists and Republic there in Taiwan always had this fight going on, not so much for moral issues, but because the gold was moved out of China. What gold was left, the Japanese had stolen. Anyway, those assets were first moved to Taiwan, and then later on, those were moved to Indonesia. And as it turns out here, it says the same goes for the Shah of Iran. His main assets are also held and safeguarded in Indonesia after the 1950s. Well, this is an interesting scenario. Solo Jawa also had been the central point of a great expansive Asian kingdom in the 1300s. After pressure from Islam, they retreat east. So from 900 to 1000 AD, the high priest in Jawa gets direction from divine inspiration that they have to travel or move to Bali and establish a successful colony. The first attempt fails. Some 100 years later, they receive a second direct command from the divine to do the same. Direction is given for that's just the tradition. Anyway, it says by 1500, the whole royal court of Solo, Jawa, have moved to Bali, here to safeguard the traditions and culture from the pressures of Islam. Now, I would guess in that part of the country that I think when I was there in Indonesia, it was, I think Keith had told me that the percentage of Muslim was something like 80%.
Right. That's high.
So they kept moving in over the centuries.
So this is why Neil Keenan was over in those bunkers over there digging underground looking for the gold.
Who?
Neil Keenan.
Oh, Neil Keenan, he's nuts. Actually, I was involved in an operation. As it turned out, one of the there were either 10 or 12 Japanese kings, and I think we were dealing with King 9. And he was wanting to recover some of the gold, not from Bali, but he was wanting to recover some of the gold from the Philippines. And so I was involved in the planning of that operation. As it turned out, it did not happen. But his idea that I think he was something like 108 or 109 years old. And he wanted, from a conscience sake, he wanted something good to come from the use of that gold. And so he was trying to direct some to go and dig up that gold and then to distribute it, for the use of people. So he was kind of ahead of his time as far as Nasara and some of those things. But that was back in, let's see, maybe 2003 or 4. When we had that operation going on. At that time, George Bush Sr. also had Wackenhut in the Philippines trying to find that gold too. And so we were talking to some mercenaries who could go and retrieve it. And so we asked them, are you aware of the whacking huts there in Philippines? They said, yeah, we know they're there. We're not really afraid of them so much. We said the biggest problem of moving that gold out of the Philippines is the pirates. They were worried about the pirates, that patrolled around the waters and so forth. Anyway, that's another story, another day.
Right.
Let's get back to our storyline here. Anyway, between 900 and 1600 AD, further exploration, there are really interesting linguistic and cultural traces indicating close contact. Now, this is interesting. Close contact between Java and Bali and Polynesian, Mayan Americans, and a few from Hawaii. Also, the Maoris figure into this. So I have this little diagram down here. We can enlarge it so everybody can see it.
Right, down from New Zealand. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So there was starting to be a interchange as far as way as north into native Mayan culture in America. Remember we had talked about that one Mindanao record?
Yes.
And I had explained that the Mayan culture was certainly worldwide because the translators of that particular record, one was from the United States, two of the elders were from Guatemala, one from Taiwan, and one from Ethiopia. Just get out a world map and start drawing
Exactly.
lines from here to there, and you'll find out that there's been quite a bit of interchange, going on that I guess been basically lost to history. Anyway, getting back here to our subject matter, we'll go on. It says the Mayan and Bali calendar use very similar symbols. Now, we had talked about when we first started up that we just went through what's called the winter solstice. This, folks, is December the 22nd, is the end of the Mayan calendar. Everybody thought it was in 2012, but as it turns out, the Gregorian calendar was 5 years off. So what everybody was talking about in 2012, now it just occurred today in 2017 because we have just now come to the end of the Mayan calendar. And now what we're wondering is what comes next.
Right. So you're saying
we're predicting good things.
Just to clarify, you're saying that the prediction was 5 years off.
Yes.
The calculation of when the Mayan calendar ends wasn't 2012, but is in fact 2017, which means yesterday it ended and today it begins something new.
Correct.
Okay, just to clarify for our viewers. Just want to make sure we're clear. Okay.
Today is a very significant day. We are starting something new.
What does that mean, Winston?
Well, the prospects look very bright.
We can move forward on the policy. I think we're get the these.
Well, look at all the changes that are happening.
Yeah, get these indictments processed. I think we can start moving forward.
Yeah. So today, folks, is a very significant day. It's kind of interesting. We're having this GoldFish report today.
Not a coincidence. No coincidences. That's
probably maybe not.
Hey, well, why not? Who's going to usher in the new calendar? If it's not us on GoldFish report.
Yeah. And then this last statement down here says that the temple of that religion in Solo Bawe. And the Mayan temples are identical.
Yeah.
This is a planetary thing that's going on. Certainly not as fast as we're able to do it, but they did it. This is really important to consider. Well, let's go on here a little bit. Now we're getting into another subject, which has to do with what's known as the Illuminati breeding program, which is back to the banking story. All right. Legends of a shadow power behind the scenes called the Illuminati. Now, let me just say first off, that term there has been so misused that it makes your head spin. But anyway, this may be how it started. So in between 12 and 1300 AD, Queen Roro Kaidu, and you can look her up on the internet, it has a lot of her history there. Anyway, she was apparently a beautiful, illuminated being. She literally shines up a room and never grows old. Okay. Now, what kind of an entity would we call her?
Well, not human. She never grows old. She's, you know,
All right. She lights up her room when she comes in, and she never grows old. All right. So she's something different than the typical woman that we meet on the street. All right. Anyway, she married the king of Solo. She promises to always protect the kingdom and return when needed. Her descendants take the name of Chakra Ningrat, which is translated into our terms is the illuminated. So that's where this word came from. Now, down here, we're going to find, you can see perhaps a little bit better, make this a little bit bigger so people can see this. So what's going to happen under the direction of Knights Templars and these other elements that they're associated with? They're going to start what's called a breeding program. It's going to involve the Asians, Chinese, the Middle East, the European, and then the whole Asian community. All right, because why? That's where the gold is. These 128 royal families, as they call themselves, are claiming that they own the gold, which I would take deference to, but we'll go on with the story anyhow. All right. So starting in 1300 to 1700 AD, the royals marry royals and none other. The Java bloodline was important, and the Chinese, European, and Middle East royals all intermarry. 1700, all major wars are basically in between close or distant royal family members. They are all related one way or the other. They fight over land and water. And then with advancing technology, war gets more and more destructive, and in an enlightened moment, some agree to try and systematically do something about it. Okay, so now we start with the diagram here of a reverse family tree. So we have these various elements that are claiming to be royal families, and I think probably a lot of them are Anunnaki myself. I mean, I can't prove that, but it only makes sense to me. And so these 128 royal families start to intermarry, so it goes from 128 down to 64 because of the combination. The many wars in Europe has a very good reason to stop family interfighting. And around 1750, 128 of the world's most important royals agreed to a breeding plan. They married or had their children following a system having their respective first son or daughter marry or mate according to the same plan. Okay, so these are arranged marriages for political reasons. So as we see the breakdown here, we got 128 families, down to 64, down to 32. So this is, again, this is a reverse family tree. Okay, the objective is to create the King of Kings, the enlightened one. A person who would equally represent each and every one of the participating 128 royal families of the world. Okay, so our family tree now is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. 128 down to 64, down to 32, down to 16, down to 8. And we keep going. Over the course of 7 generations, they slowly bring down the numbers of participating families all the way down to 1. Finally, in the year 1900 AD, the One is born. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you know what year President Sukarno was born? 1901.
I thought it was 1900. Okay.
Well, this guy says 1900. Yeah, but actually, according to the biography on the internet, President Sukarno was born actually in 1901. So who do you think this M1 is?
Well, it was Sukarno.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it was Sukarno. And why do you think that JFK wanted to do business with him? Because he knew who he was.
Right, he knew who he was and what he wanted to do. And he wanted to stop he wanted to break up the banking system.
Yeah, he wanted to, yeah. Okay, as we go, yeah. So what we're going to go into here momentarily is the plan of the experts and what was set up, and then we'll go into what went wrong because the whole thing was hijacked. All right. But anyway, now finally we have M1 in the form of President Sukarno. Now, with M1 in existence, it is time to move on to the next step in the plan. In 1920 through 21, they start to consolidate or call back their combined wealth with the intention of placing it into the hands of M1. M1 is then to redistribute the combined wealth of the world according to an agreed upon plan. So there's a plan going on here. For instance, what caused the Great Depression in the United States?
Well, it was the bankruptcy.
No, M1. They called back the gold. And that's what caused the Great Depression in the United States and other places on the planet. They took the gold back that had been wrongfully taken by some of these elements.
Okay. You might want to put mute on that while you're doing that.
Nope. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, or coughing. I try to do that too because it's loud in the microphone. No, I thought it was the recuperation of assets, which I guess is what it was, which is bankruptcy. But
yeah. Now it led to what happened in 1933, but the Great Depression, the failure and everything was caused because of the callback of the assets that was being put into the hands of President Sukarno. Let's see. 9 of the most prominent royal families representing different regions of the world were driving this project. Together with the Chinese royal KS, one of the most active and respected among them were this individual known as Paku Bueno X, who was M1's biological father and the king of Solo, Bawe, from the Chakra Ningrat, or the illuminated Solomon bloodline. And here we have a diagram. We make it a little bit bigger so people might be able to see it a little bit better.
It looks fine. We could see it.
Oh,
If
you
it's
can see
too
it
big, we
fine?
can't read the writing. Yeah, because it's off the screen. If it's too big, the
Oh, yeah.
writing, it's too big, it's off the screen and we can't read it. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
perfect. You just leave it, yeah, like that. That's
So
good.
this is just a little diagram
Mm,
to show. It says this creates, you might not be able to read this, pretty small. It says this creates the 1928 credit crunch.
mm.
It's quite similar to today's situation. All right. So in 1928, this PBX, as they call him, calls a meeting in Solo, Jawa for all the 128 families to attend. Here they sign a power of attorney, transferring all their combined assets into the hands of M1. He is then supposed to distribute this wealth according to an agreed upon plan called the Plan of the Experts. So here we have a diagram of that. So this is 1928. Plan of the Experts came out. The Plan of the Experts, they feel, is divine. It's driven by a genuine attempt to better the fate of all mankind and bring them all into a material level of comfort, after which man is free enough from daily troubles to pursue mankind's ultimate goal of unity with God for each and every one. It is a long worked upon plan of unifying the world, quote, for as good as possible, for as many as possible. Okay, so that is the underlying goal of the Plan of the Experts and this system that they've set up by putting the assets into the control of President Sukarno.
Right, and in doing so, he established the prosperity packages. Is that correct? And the trusts.
Well, it gets down the road. We talk about that, but
Okay.
not in particular. Okay, so how it's supposed to work? If you have all the money in the world and you want to make that a better and more equal world, how would you go about it? Is a serious question. The people faced with the problem planned it along these lines, all with very good intentions. First, collect it into one big pot. Set someone you trust in charge, but have checks and balances in place. Okay, again, this part of the presentation is how it was supposed to work.
Okay.
Okay, here is the original intention of how it should have worked, could have worked. One of the primary objective was to free the nation from colonialism. I mean, ever since the days of Columbus, and certainly before that with the British Empire, the sun never sets on the British Empire, and they had gone through, the planet, you know, creating all these colonies. I mean, for instance, we have, for instance, Vietnam. Vietnam was a colony of the French. The French got in there and fought with them, but couldn't overcome them. And then the United States, not because they were worried about colonialism so much, they were worried about the drug trade. Anyway, so that's what the Vietnam War was all about. The Vietnamese people were fighting against colonialism. Since one of the primary objects or objectives was to free the nation from colonialism, these new nations should be governed as guided democracies. So up on top of the world power pyramid, there should be a forum where every nation has a voice and a vote. When ready, M1 would transfer his power to that world government body. Today, it's called the United Nations. Okay, now again, look real careful how it was supposed to work. Supposed to work. So at some point in this transition of this wealth, there would be a future world government body. Today we call that the United Nations. I don't know that they use those particular terms back in those times, because it went through that evolution. You remember, with the League of Nations, eventually it turned into the United Nations.
Mhm.
but this is how it was supposed to work. Emphasis on supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Now, all these new and old independent nations need financing. To supply that and track all major fund movements, you need a central bank to do all this, to regulate all the central banks. So the first central bank that was set up is the Bank of International Settlements. The Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland. And who is it in Switzerland running the banking?
Well, it's the Rothschilds.
No, the Knights Templars. This is how it was supposed to
Well,
work.
that's how it was supposed. Okay, that was supposed to work. Wasn't supposed to be that. Okay.
Yeah, don't jump to the future.
I
Yeah,
was coming. Yeah, I was coming. It was being factual. Okay.
yeah, don't jump to the future. We're trying to establish how the system was set up, what the
Yeah.
plan of the experts were.
Got it.
That's why I've said in times past, if the plan of the experts had been allowed to move forward, I think it would have been successful.
Mm-hmm.
But then it got infiltrated by these dark, draconian entities. All right. So anyway, the Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland was set up to basically to be a central bank or a clearinghouse for all other banks that would also be set up. So government funding, the purpose of the Bank of International Settlements was for government funding, tracking of all what he calls mayor funds, and I'm not really sure what that word means. But anyway, government side of world finance, central bank for the central banks. So that was the original intent of the Bank of International Settlements. Okay, to give everyone access to the best and the brightest regarding infrastructure and financing, the World Bank was incorporated. The World Bank's job is to employ the best in their fields who will then project and infrastructure solutions around the world. They will also finance projects that cannot meet normal commercial banking requirements. So again, the way it was supposed to work was the Bank of International Settlements was put in place, and then the World Bank infrastructure building and planning approves cash utilization from the Fed. We haven't gotten to the Fed yet, and others. Now, what was the turning point in the World Bank? Do you remember? Robert McNamara. Is loosey-goosey banking. That's what destroyed the World Bank, was Robert McNamara.
Ooh.
Anyway, that's just part of our history. Okay, so going along here, again, we're just trying to set this system up so everybody can understand how it was intended. Anyway, to feed the private side of world finance with cash, you need an outlet. The Fed were to take this role. The Federal Reserve System, with its 12 banks. The Fed were to take this role. It was to be the cash cow of the world on the private side of banking. They were to supply all the prime banks with funding, the top 25 banks around the world. Those are the prime banks, okay? Not just in America, but others as well. Okay, so here we begin. Here's the system that was set up. Here's where it started to go all wrong. The Fed became a political tool to push power agendas. Its owners eventually hijacked the whole system. Okay, again, to help failing economies and guide them along the way, they needed the IMF, International Monetary Fund. Their work was to be the lender of last resort. We will help you, but here are the conditions. Now, here's where they start to talk about what they call guided democracies. And that was, developing countries, who were, in some instances, coming out of the Stone Age, coming into this new world and so forth, in order to participate on an equal basis and to share in this economy, they were wanting to set up what would be called guided democracies. All the planned new small independent nations would at times run into trouble, and the IMF was there supposedly to be there to help fix things. So again, we have this diagram. So the purpose of the IMF was a controlling lender of last resort. In other words, we will help you, but we need to talk about guided democracy. And the IMF was put in place as a first aid to a failing economy. See, like I say, when you have a developing country, and I've talked to some, actually I talked to the prime minister of one of these developing economies, and he was all messed up. These conversations we got into. But again, trying to establish a country based on certain principles, if they wanted to participate, and if they went to the IMF as a last resort for financing, then they had to develop themselves into what we would call a guided democracy, so that they could, in fact, function, within that system. All right, so now we got the IMF here.
So was it he and Johnson that hijacked it when they assassinated Kennedy?
Yeah, well, that's part of it. Anyway, we started talking about justice. All right. To solve international legal cases and humanitarian issues across national borders, they needed an international court of justice. The Hague fills that role. One of its offsprings is the Geneva Conventions. So we're starting to fill in the plan here. Okay, so we have the International Court of Justice, who come out with what's known as the Geneva Conventions. Yeah. So this is a part of the plan of the experts before it got hijacked. Later on in the scheme, once the new nations are firmly established and functional, you can join them into bigger blocks, all for the purpose of unity, peace, and togetherness. The USA could stand as a good example, and similar solutions were foreseen for Europe, Africa, and Asia. So they have here the working model. They said, it has EU, which stands for European Union. That was intended as a part of the plan of the experts, again, before it got hijacked. Because when they set up the European Union, they created a currency and did not follow international protocols for their currency. The euro is backed by nothing but thin air. And that's the problem. Again, the draconian influence. So again, talking about unification through Europe, Africa, and Asia. I think we had talked a little bit in times past about the Zimbabwe bond.
Right.
As an effort to unify the currencies of the African nations. Hey, there's quite a bit to this story. And I think you can get, once you study this plan of the experts, you can kind of get a pretty good idea of how things were set up and for what reasons, and then, you can start to look at what happened to cause the plan of the experts to fail. That's my purpose today, to show you how it should be, how it was anticipated. So these projects are still on the drawing board, but if you study today's news, I don't know when this article was written. It's probably, 12, 15 years ago, probably.
I remember the website too, and you're right, I haven't seen it lately.
Yeah,
Four Winds.
Yeah, Four Winds. Yeah, he used to come out with some interesting things. But then they shut him down and he'd come back up sometimes. Sometimes he didn't. Obviously, whoever wrote this article, had a good understanding, and we'll go into some more of that a little bit later. Anyway, these projects are still on the drawing board. If you study today's news, you can see how the seeds are there.
Mm-hmm.
Just as with the European Union is quietly there until suddenly the time is right and things move very fast. The difference from what was originally planned is that other forces are now pushing the same agenda for control reasons. It got hijacked, folks.
Mm.
There are very approximate timelines. Time will tell when it all happens and how it's implemented. As it stands today, at the time of this writing, as it stands today, we will end up with one of two solutions. Right now, there's a fight of control going on. Okay, here are the two things that he's suggesting. Number one, a world paper currency backed by gold, governed by a multinational assembly.
This is a little too large on the screen.
Oh, it is.
Yeah,
I'm
if you
sorry.
just
I'm just trying to bring this thing up here so you can see these 2 points.
we can
Oh,
see
you
it.
could?
We just can't see the
And
rest of it because it's too big. Yeah, if you just leave it in that one position, we can read it.
oh, okay.
That's perfect right there. We don't ever have to change the size of anything. It
Really?
looks just, yeah, on my screen it looks perfect.
Okay. Anyway, one of the things they wanted was a worldwide paper currency.
Mm-hmm.
Or number two, as the alternative, a cashless society solution, where ultimately the banks or its owners control the money supply and flows. Again, this is the way it was supposed to be set up.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's, going bananas over all these travesties that have happened where they've destroyed the plan of the experts. So now we're trying to recover from that. Mm-hmm. And we're going into some new paradigms and so forth. So we'll see how it works out. But this was, in fact, the original plan.
Well, we'll just stand by until we get our connection with Winston. Oh, we were losing our connection, Winston.
Intention was.
It's okay. Keep going. You're frozen on the screen, but go ahead and keep going. Someone doesn't want us talking about this, I guess.
Then down here in the left-hand corner, you see key dates.
We're having some computer internet.
Okay, is it back yet?
Yeah, you were going in and out. Yeah. All of a sudden, just as you're talking about this,
yeah, we need to come in and have.
Actually, I can't really hear you. I think we're going to end up dropping a connection, but we'll try to get through it. Actually, I can't hear you at all at this point. I'm going to. Okay. Where were we?
All right. So before we were so rudely interrupted by some troll, we were going through this diagram and so forth. So we'll take up where we left off. And that was on this plan, the key dates that they were working toward was over here with the lower left-hand corner of this one page. You see it says key dates. 2015. By 2015, all trade barriers are gone. And before 2020, there would be one worldwide currency in use.
Okay, let me just interject here. This wasn't the intention. This New World Order agenda of one world religion, one world government, one world money, that has a different agenda than what this is about. And I want to make a distinction for our viewers because a lot of people think that a one world currency is part of the New World Order agenda for depopulation and everything else. And it's what you're saying here is that's not the intention, but they were going to misuse the process.
Yes. Okay. The intervention of the Draco reptilians, and we just about apparently listening to the different reports and what James Gilliland shares and some of the others, it appears that they have removed that element physically.
Intervention, you mean infestation?
Either way.
Okay, because
And then we have the report of these sealed indictments. I think the number counts now up something like 10,000 or something.
right.
And so they're getting rid of, not only have they destroyed the influence of the corruption by the Draco element, but now they're going to remove all the humans who were operating under that influence who have not seen the light, so to
Okay.
speak.
Okay.
So again, what we're talking about with this presentation is the system that was conceived of by the plan of the experts from 1928, which was never totally implemented
Hmm.
because of the intervention by some of these negative elements.
Right, which led to financial abuse to
Correct.
humanity, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So we're moving. Like I say, today is significant because we just got to the end of the Mayan calendar. Now we're looking for something better. So this is today is a significant date. Anyway, let's move along with some of this. The objective, again, as this author points out, well, number one, to break down colonialism, to free the nations and create an equal opportunity for a startup, to control these new nations through the concept of debt, or as they mentioned there, a guided democracy
Okay.
using the IMF, and also to unify the world. And again, the goal as good as possible for as many as possible. And so they're not going to force anybody into this, but they're trying to make the conditions on the planet as good as possible for as many people as can be positively affected.
Right.
That's the intent.
Right. This was part of the goal of bringing people closer to God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Not
They're
not
trying.
not simply to, uh, to get to a point where um, we're managing our debt. That's not our highest purpose on this planet,
No.
folks. Right.
The concept of the debt of these developing countries was to push them toward a guided democracy.
How did they define that, Winston?
Well, I don't think I want to. We'll just look at what could have been. Like I said, you have a developing country or developing people. How do they catch up with the more advanced countries? It's not like turning on a light switch. And so there has to be a certain amount of development to bring every country into a equal developmental a place. And
Right.
so what does it take for a new startup country to get there? And so it has to be managed. And the way they wanted to manage that toward what they call the guided democracy was through the IMF, and through the control of the debt of a country. Again, they were trying to alleviate the necessities of this third dimension, which is food, clothing, and shelter, so that people would have the opportunity. In other words, I've seen this many times in my life, is that people do not consider spiritual things if their belly is empty.
Yeah.
They just don't do it. And like Scott had mentioned, fully 1/3 of the people on the planet wake up in the morning not knowing where their next meal is coming from. So you can see the possibilities and the intent
Yeah.
of what the plan of the experts was. And so again, like I say, it's too bad. It's too bad that it had not had an opportunity to fully develop. If
Sure
it had
is.
not been infiltrated, corrupted, and all these kind of things, would we have arrived at the condition of the planet here on December the 22nd, 2017, in the mess that we're in?
Well, to the credit of the people who are still trying to implement the plan, perhaps President Trump is one of those Knights Templar.
Could
You know,
be.
he did pass the tax reform bill yesterday.
Mm,
We don't know what's in it. There's lots of probably hidden goodies in there.
well, whatever it is, it did free up some other things apparently, so we're looking forward to those. Okay, let's move along here a little bit. Because again, here's what happened. Again, one of the objectives was to break down colonialism. Now, could this plan have freed? Let's just use Vietnam for an instance. I mean, we have all these others, but let's just talk about Vietnam. Because again, as part of this new plan, the revaluation of the Vietnamese dong has certainly moved up. And so again, if you talk about the breakdown of colonialism, what did it take to break down colonialism? I mean, the French was not wanting to give it up. And after World War II, Vietnam actually sent envoys to President Truman to become an ally. And the stupid haberdasher from St. Louis refused them.
You want to give a
And
name to that?
yeah, Harry Truman. He refused that. He would not allow Vietnam to become an ally of the United States. Now, how stupid is that? So they're 20 years later, now we're in there because the Vietnamese kicked France's butt. Now the United States decided they would go in to try to take control because of what? Because of the CIA. The CIA wanted the control of the drugs. So anyway, one of the objectives of this plan of the experts would have been to remove colonialism from Vietnam, along with the other countries that were under the same onus. So again, here's the plan. Okay, so the breakdown of colonialism, and we're kind of moving kind of slow here. I need to probably speed it up a little bit. Anyway, well, yeah, I need to really move along. World War II was in fact a planned war because they hoped to use World War II to break down colonialism. I mean, it wasn't just about the Axis powers and all that kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah, you can
They
just
wanted,
comment on the slide. Yeah, if you want to move past it. If you can
yeah,
comment on what it represents without, that'd be good.
yeah. The United States is the first country to get access to big funding according to the plan of the expert. The Fed, the Federal Reserve System, borrows huge amounts and funds the New Deal in the 1930s. The United States is set to be the great liberator of nations and the champion of democracy. To achieve this, the intention is for the United States to build up the military, function as world police, and control the outcome of the future of World War II. Now, many of those things were, in fact, put into place. But again, either short-sighted people or direct intervention did not allow those things to materialize in the way that they were intended. Again, as pointed out here, the second element here was to free the nations and to create an equal start. And so we have these developing countries, not so much in Europe, certainly in Africa and Asia. And as it points out here, in 1946, there were actually 3 Marshall Plans set up within the United Nations to fund the world after World War II. Boy, this could really be a 2-week discussion, couldn't it?
It sure it
But,
sure could. This is amazing
yeah.
stuff because there's just so many, uh, blanks to fill in, but
Oh yeah.
we'll do it
Oh yeah.
another time. Sure.
Yeah. So we'll go along as quickly as we can. Uh, the hyper accounts, people will criticize the Federal Reserve notes for creating money out of thin air. Well, this was part of the plan called the hyper accounts, trading systems within the Federal Reserve system that creates money out of nothing, which would have been apropos had there been the proper checks and balances. So again, a lot of these things that we see and criticize today, we need to take a second look at some of these things.
But a whole lot of people had to be doing and acting willfully to do the wrong thing in order to get it to have, in order for that to have worked.
Yeah.
In order for them to hijack the system as they did, a whole lot of people had to do the wrong thing, for a long time together,
Yeah. Yeah.
which they
So
have done.
again, yeah, here's some of the, as it points out here up in the left-hand corner, these hyper accounts improperly used leads to more power to the Fed, to the Bank of England, the Bank of International Settlements, banking power triangle at the cost of the people controlling the gold, which opens the door for the 1963 through 1965 complete banking takeover of the system. What was the first element of that takeover? Assassination of John F. Kennedy.
There we have it. Right. Excuse me.
That's why this, Kennedy information that's come out, most recently has been so important for people to understand.
Yeah, I always felt like President Trump was taking over the helm really from where President Kennedy left off.
It could be in some respects.
In many ways, right?
Yeah, you can look at it that way. Anyway, you can talk, you can look at all the different things on this article to understand it more fully. There were certain elements I want to get down to. Okay, down here in the lower left hand of this talks about M1 issuing certificates to some of these developing countries in Africa and Asia so that they will have gold certificates, so they can start to participate worldwide with their existing currencies. That's what M1 was doing. That'd be President Sukarno. Then it points out that the Fed, the Bank of England, the BIS never follow through. In other words, M1 set it up, and the Fed and the Bank of England and the Bank of International Settlements never followed through on the plan. And it talks about the split between Indonesia and Chinese that started in 1928, was triggered in 1934 by the death of this PBX fella who was the king. And so then at that point, M1 looks to the United States and John F. Kennedy to help lessen the Fed's power. Then again, you can look at all the different things.
Can you just explain what you're passing? You don't have to go into the details, but just give
Well,
what
this diagram this fellow's making, continues, but it adds elements into the diagram. That's what I'm skipping through.
Okay.
So if you look down here in the kind of right in the middle of your screen, it talks about the JFK and M1. They make 3 agreements. Then it talks about those 3 agreements that would help to lessen the power of the Fed so that these developing nations could in fact start to progress so that they can move up and take an equal seat in the world finances. That's what was going on. So right there in your middle of your screen, it talks about those 3 particular things.
Right. See it.
And so again, the screen continues. And then you see it on your lower right.
See that?
As a result of Green Hilton, a transfer from M1 to JFK of 140 million kilograms of gold to back a new United States dollar issued by the U.S. Treasury, which is Executive Order 1111 in July of 1963. The objective is to replace the Fed with the U.S. Treasury as the issuer of U.S. dollars. And this executive order was signed on the 14th of November, 1963.
Too bad.
Well, yeah, we're just trying to.
It's too
And
bad.
then the addition on this next diagram here
Right.
is a few days later, JFK is killed. All right, now let's continue on. In 1964, M1 gave a key speech to build the world anew. He wants to start from scratch, a new United Nations, a new Federal Reserve System, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what, after the death of JFK and the failure of that effort, 1964, M1, or President Sukarno, makes a speech to reformulate the plan and start from scratch. Now look here at the bottom. So after he made this speech, M1 was removed from power by a CIA supported coup. He was held in house arrest until his death. All this with silent Chinese approval, because the Chinese at that time had become what? Communists. So that's kind of getting to the end of that story. I don't know how. Yeah, we'll not go much further than this because it brings us up to a certain point. Do you have any questions about that? And then I want to bring up another article.
There's many questions, Winston. We don't have time for all the questions. There's
Okay.
so many. You know, what happened then with the agreements and the transfer of this gold to JFK after he was assassinated?
I don't know what actually became of the physical gold.
Or 9/11, I think, was in part also to.
It very well could have been.
Yeah, to hijack that gold that was at the
Like
bottom.
I say, I don't have any way to trace that gold. But again, just look what happened. And so I think we've, gotten all the way from King Solomon up to the days of JFK. And so the rest of the article has a lot of other diagrams and explanations and so forth, which we obviously don't have time to run through.
Well, we usually do a 2-hour program, and we started a half an hour late, so we have a half an hour.
I understand that, but I want to get into some other elements.
Other things, okay. Well, we'll just have to revisit this another time.
Yeah, we can do that. Now, let me look. This next thing I want to share, let me find this. It's an article.
So, folks, if you want to know what happened, this is the story and why, these poor countries can't seem to get out of poverty. We knew it was corruption, but we didn't know how. We didn't know what the mechanisms exactly were and what was stopping progress. But as you're saying, this infiltration of this draconian infestation, which is a lot of people, I don't have firsthand, knowledge of that, but that's what the research, that's what you're claiming, and that's what many have claimed. So it's a problem on the planet. Definitely needed to be call in. Needed to call in the pest control.
Oh, there it is. That's what I'm looking for. All right, you see that?
Yeah.
Oh man, now it's got me goofed up here.
It looks perfect on my screen, so I'm recording it. Looks just fine if that's what you.
Yeah, but I can't see it on my screen. Problem.
Really? It's too big or something on your screen, or is it?
No. Hold on, I know how to solve it. I think.
Okay, I'll just put it on pause.
Yeah. When you're ready.
Okay, it's back.
All right, now we're going to get into some of the efforts that were made to try to correct the problem.
Okay.
Like I say, President Sukarno was M1. I forgot what year he died, but as a result of his death, another M1 was put in place, and I don't know who that is. I have inquired, but I was informed it's none of my business. So I'll just leave it at that. But just knowing that there's an M1 still there, which is very apparent as we had talked in the past about what's called Swiss Indo, whereas the Indonesian government, under the authority of M1, had actually instituted something very similar to Nasara in Indonesia. So that was under the authority of M1. Who he is, I don't know, and how he's protected, I don't know either. But just know that there is a successor as M1 to President Sukarno. Now, we're going to get into, part of the correction. As had been mentioned, World War II was planned to facilitate the enactment of the plan of the experts. And things didn't go exactly right. In any event, after World War II was over, then the powers that be set up a committee. It's got a long name to it, but in any event, it was the result. That committee was the result of other agreements that had happened internationally, and they were given a 50-year commission to correct the problems, as a result of World War II, and to implement the provisions of the plan of the experts. Now, the three countries that were put into that power position were the United States, United Kingdom, and France. They had a 50-year commission, and as a result of the Marshall Plan and all those different things that happened, Bretton Woods and all those things that were put in place to produce the currency to rebuild the planet after World War II. All those funds were controlled by the United States, United Kingdom, and France, and who did not apply those monies to the rebuilding of the planet. They stole it. All right, so now we got a brand new problem. So at the expiration of the 50 years, it was decided by the royal families, whoever that might be, they needed to do something else. And so at that point, they called upon one of the royal family members, and I don't know what his birth name is, but the name that was given to him was Ray C. Dam. So it's Dr. Dam that we're talking about here. Anyway, he was appointed January 20th, 1995 by the governments of the world to act as the sole arbiter, owner, and controller of the international collateral combined accounts of the global debt facility. So all that gold that had started with King Solomon, which was accumulated in Indonesia and added to, eventually ends up in this international collateral combined accounts of the global debt facility. This is the gold that underwrites all the currencies on the planet at present, and still does. So as you look at this article, it's we won't go too much into the article. It's quite extensive. It talks about okay. So anyway, the file of Dr. Dam, secured by U.S. Congress under third level to the fifth level rules, with appointment and protective reaffirmed by the United States Senate. When I was there in Cambodia talking to him, he said he showed me certain documents to a certain level. He said, I can't show you anything above this level. He said, because you're not cleared to see it.
Interesting.
So what he's talking about here is these documents on the third to the fifth level, which is under lock and key, put it bluntly. Anyway, Dr. Dam, say again.
They pertain specifically to
those appointments. They're all under treaty.
Okay, so it's regarding a treaty.
Yeah, they're treaty documents.
Okay.
Which are not to be viewed by us commoners, as it were. Anyway, this points out Dr. Dam was born in Cambodia in 1950. It goes through his education. He was highly educated, highly,
Mm.
you know, I was ever so impressed with Dr. Ray C. Dam, ever so impressed.
Hmm.
First off, he's very proper. And, you know, if there is a hair or anything out of place on Dr. Dam, I never saw it. That guy was absolutely immaculate. Uh, anyway, to go through a little bit of the history here that folks can read, uh, you know, about the different things that happened. I'm not going to go too much through this document. We'll provide it so other people, you know, can have access to it. I don't even know who wrote this article. I can't remember where I got it from. Anyway, there was one thing uh, that I wanted to point out, which is kind of interesting. Make sure I can find it here.
Collateral accounts it talks about. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it talks about all the agreements of the nations and
Mm.
all the things that happened. Let's see here. I mean, it's just an interesting side note.
Bretton Woods Agreement. All the plans were there. All the good people were
It's all
trying.
there.
They were
Yeah.
all trying to do this, and it was all hijacked. Green Hilton Agreement. Mm-hmm.
Well, for instance, it says here that talking about President Carter and President Kennedy, the control of these assets would cede automatically to the United States upon fall from power of President Sukarno. This occurred in 1967. The potential for this agreement led to Executive Order 11, issued in July 63, which would have provided the Department of the Treasury the power to issue United States dollars. Within 2 weeks after signing the Green Hilton Agreement, which could have been then enabled consolidation of that executive order, Kennedy was assassinated after signing. With the death of President Kennedy, the authority granted to the Treasury was never taken up. Let's see, there was this one little interesting blurb here. If I can find it real quick.
It's a great article, Winston. I can't wait to publish this whole thing and make it available to people so they can hold.
Yeah, you can get a
These
great
folks
deal of
accountable.
understanding. I mean, it's complicated. I mean, you know, it is. But, you know, I mean, to fully understand what's going on, you're just going to have to dig into it and study it.
Okay.
Let's see.
Go ahead.
Yeah, anyway, this one interesting thing, this one name that's mentioned here in this paragraph starts out with Sukarno was awarded a 2.5% interest in the assets, blah, blah, blah. He willed all the documents of guarantee and obligation to his teacher and to his heir son, Dr. Sino Eddie Sukanto. So Sino Eddie is an interesting element in some of these things.
Right, Mr. Sino, who was
because it has been conjectured
mm-hmm.
by those who are in that part of the world that actually Sino Eddie is actually the father of Barack Obama. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but like my one friend pointed out, he said, look at him. He's Indonesian. Look at him. So, anyway, the intrigue builds up and builds up and builds up. Okay, well, let's, like I say, we'll provide these articles for anyone who would like to read them.
Interesting, Winston.
Yeah, it's quite a history to try to figure these things out. Now, as a result of the appointment of Dr. Ray C. Dam as a sole arbiter, he created what's known as the Office of International Treasury Control. And as a sole arbiter, he is the one that, in fact, has the control of these things. Now, there's one more thing I want to point people to. is this right here. This is an interview that I set up with Ethan Fox with Keith Scott. Now, Keith Scott worked with Dr. Dam all those years for about, I don't know, 15 or 17 years before tragedy happened. Anyway, Keith Scott himself is the chairman, I mean, not the chairman, but the chief of the cabinet of the Office of International Treasury Control. And he gives a very, very good explanation. Very good explanation. So if people wanted to go and learn more by listening, to what Keith unveils, because he tells you the whole purpose of the OITC, what they could do, what they couldn't do, what they're, just how it all developed and everything. So if you want to go and look at this particular interview between Keith Scott and Ethan Fox, this is a very, very good interview, that people could go and listen to. Is that plain enough? Can you see that okay?
Yeah, you can see the
Okay.
the title of it, so people can Google that. They can
Yeah.
look that up.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, you'd be, really, if you really want to understand OITC, go listen to this interview.
Very good.
Now, my own experience, the reason I bring some of these things up is, my participation. We had gone in 2010, early 2010. I was working with some fellows on some humanitarian projects. In my case, in the case of Floyd, it was largely for Native American projects. And then one of our other friends that was involved with us, Larry, African American, and he was working on projects in Africa. And so we were looking for funding for some of the projects that we had undertaken to accomplish. As a result of that, Floyd had gone to Cambodia to meet with Dr. Dam. And because that was one, as you listen to Keith explain, the purpose of OITC. So Floyd had gone to Cambodia to meet with Dr. Dam on funding for our humanitarian projects. And so, in consequence of that, Dr. Dam agreed that he would help us to fund these projects. He was going to set up a trading platform for us here in the United States that we could use the funds from to finance, these projects and stuff that we had undertaken. For instance, the one project that I had in the Southwest, our business plan at that time was for $15 billion. That's how much money we needed to fully implement the business plan that we had set up for the American Southwest. And so, we're talking about large numbers here. And so when Dr. Dam offered to set us up a trading platform to generate the funds that we would need to implement these programs, that's what our object was. And that's why Floyd had gone to Cambodia to get to see the possibilities of that. Now, that never came to pass because when Dr. Dam and Keith Scott went to HSBC in Hong Kong to liberate $500 million for our trading platform, the banker basically, gave the finger and said no.
Amazing.
Oh yeah, it is. That guy's a goner. That guy's a goner. If he's not gone already. But anyway, they finally got HSBC under control now, under the auspices, if you will, of the Chinese. What they call the Chinese elders. And we talked about this in the past. I don't need to go back over that again. Mm-hmm. But in any event, in connection with that, Dr. Dam had requested that the others of us who were involved in this humanitarian effort and so forth, he would like to talk to us as well, because he wanted to know who he was doing business with.
Certainly.
And so Larry and I, got on a plane. That's a long trip, folks. That's a long trip to go to Indonesia. And so, to Cambodia, where Dr. Dam had his office. But we did, we went. And, certain things were discussed. Dr. Dam was willing to show us certain documents and so forth up to a certain level, as we had mentioned. And then, for whatever his reasons, apparently I impressed him. And Keith was for whatever reason, I don't know how does a hillbilly impress somebody like that? God only knows. Well, there were other ethereal
Right.
connections
Hmm.
between myself and Ray Dam. So as a result of that, and certainly after I had exposed what was going on in the United States, because Dr. Dam and Keith both were complaining as the underwriter of all the mortgage banks. They were under the impression that the American people simply weren't paying their mortgages. And I said, hold on for a minute. Let me explain some things to you about what's actually going on with these lending banks. They're all predatory. And so I explained what had gone on.
Hmm.
And so at that point, Dr. Dan said, well, okay, our information now has been updated. And so what he did, he gave me a commission to go back and see what could be done about correcting that. And so he actually made official documents. I can't screen share them because I don't have them on a computer, but I can just hold them up for your entertainment. Tell you how much of that you can actually see.
Office of International Treasury Control, letter of appointment and commission, notary executor, and Honorable Winston Trout. Ooh, the Honorable Winston Trout. We can see it, Winston. It's a little
Yeah,
blurry, but we get the idea. It wasn't perfectly.
yeah, and then he had this document. This first document was apostilled by an international attorney.
Mhm. Just a little bit further back, a little bit back.
Well, it's
Yeah,
pretty small
but we can
print. You
see,
really can't
right.
see that.
I see that.
But my point of saying this is because I want to go on with some other information in regards to this. And so this appointment was given to me on May the 26th of 2010. And so Dr. Dam said he would send this announcement around to the various ones that he needed to, many of them in the United States. I actually have a copy of the letter he sent to Eric Holder, the Attorney General at that time. And also he notified the United Nations and all these different ones. So this led to other things, and that was in the fall of 2010. Dr. Dan was actually arrested on false charges in Cambodia, right there in Phnom Penh.
Unbelievable.
And when they got him there, then they tried to poison him to death. But he didn't die, and upon his release, he was taken by the King of Thailand, who is his protector at this point. Now, the reason I tell this story about his attempted assassination was that, again, Dr. Dam traveled on United States passports. He had worked within the United States, I don't know, for 20 years in high-level treasury, and everybody knew him. I mean, he was well educated, and he had all this experience. He worked at all these levels, working in international finances and so forth, and that's why he was selected. That's why he was selected to fill this particular position as the sole arbiter. And I really encourage people to go and listen to that interview. Keith opens up so much for your knowledge.
Excellent.
Go and listen to it. It's about 2 hours long, but go and listen to it. Keith opens up things, that will absolutely astound you. Now, at that time, there were certain elements that were within OITC that were trying to unseat Ray Dam. I know some of those names, but I'm not going to say them. But in any event, an attempt on his life was made when he was falsely arrested in Phnom Penh. And then after it was thought, perhaps, that Dr. Dam was dead or incapacitated, then the Secretary of State of the United States, Hillary Clinton. Wow, how'd she get into this conversation? Oh,
Yeah, geez.
somebody's being killed. Oh yeah, I said okay.
Oh, man.
Anyway, once it appeared that Dr. Dan was on his way out, and Hillary Clinton gave this exact same appointment to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin Dempsey. like she thought that she was going to control the OITC by giving my appointment, as she supposed, to Martin Dempsey as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So I'm surprised I'm still alive. If you follow the trail of assassinations and deaths and everything, I would suppose I must have some awful good protection. Otherwise, I'd have been dead a long time ago.
You
Now,
must, and we're all so fortunate that you're still with us, Winston.
maybe not, who knows. But anyway, as a result of that appointment, then I came back to the United States and attempted to correct the mortgage problem. We had gotten into a trade program to produce the funds. I thought what we were going to do, and we had it pretty well set up. We had some, friends in high places who approached all the secondary mortgage paper. When the mortgages, did all those
Bundles.
trust and created all those. Anyway, they basically sold a bunch of trash paper all across the planet. I think we know how that all happened.
Toilet paper, you mean?
Toilet paper, that's about what it was. Anyway, what we're attempting to do was to create the funds necessary to buy up that paper, because we were able to contact. I mean, some of that paper was purchased by governments, banking institutions, financial institutions, and even some private individuals were actually induced to buy some of that crap. So that paper was floating around, and so what we intended to do, and one of our associates actually approached all those holders and asked them, what would you sell your paper for? And most of them are willing to sell it for 25 to 30 cents on the dollar just to get rid of it. So they're going to take a 75% hit on their investment, but they wanted to come out with something because they knew they wasn't going to get anything for it the way things were going. So we made those approaches, and then, like I say, we got into that trading program. I won't go into all the details of that, but then it was in HSBC Hong Kong that the trade went on.
Oh, gee, you would have to say that.
Yeah.
And
Well, we knew the trade had happened because we were able to trace something like 76 trillion to the United Nations. They got their cut up front because of humanitarian, things on trading platforms and so forth. And so we expected to get twice that amount for our part in this trade. And then HSBC basically gave us the finger, like they gave Dr. Dan the finger. It said, "Screw you, we're not going to do it." And so that plan to see what we were going to do was buy up all that paper and stop the foreclosures. That's what Dr. Dan wanted me to do, stop the foreclosures. And so anyway, we had intended to buy up that paper. At that point, we would stop the foreclosures because now we're holding the paper on the whole deal. And so, as OITC in the United States, that's what I was doing. And as it turned out, every time we would try to obtain the funds through trading programs, various things, so that we could buy up that secondary mortgage paper, we were blocked, always blocked.
you'd steal it.
Yeah, they all stole it. And so guess who that enrages? The United States government, because they're a part of the foreclosure scam. That's how they're funding their secret space program.
Because of double ledger accounting, because they're stealing that money that's supposed to be yours.
Yeah. And so now do you have a picture of why it is that the U.S. government, the Department of Justice, the IRS attacks me? And so, like I say, without some benevolent help, I'd have been gone a long time ago. I really would have been. But I have been able to continue on as an educator. I couldn't solve the paper problem because we were blocked. But we have continued on with education as kind of a self-help. And so we're kind of holding until NASARA can kick in. Okay.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's been quite a
Well,
battle, quite a fight. I mean,
well,
you know, people hear all kinds of things about Winston. Winston's this, Winston's under indictment, Winston's going to jail, all that kind of stuff. Well, here's the reason why I'm being prosecuted. You know, I'm just, you know, I'm opening these things up so people understand. Because aside from the destruction or the of the original plan of the experts to continue on with what that program, you know, was attempting to do. You know, we're still getting hit, you know, from time to time with any attempts to move forward to the original, to make it as good as possible for as many as possible. Repeat, as good as possible for as many as possible. And so you know, when you start out to do a good thing, you know, you're going to run into opposition. Now, what we were able to accomplish in 2012, we put together that commercial lien against the Federal Reserve banks. We had to take down the Fed because, again, you know, what Sukarno and JFK had attempted was to, again, put an end to the Fed, and they couldn't. And so what we did in 2012, Keith Scott and myself, and again, Keith as the chairman, I mean, the chief of the cabinet of the OITC, and also at that point in history, he was also the settler on the Sukarno Trust with full power of attorney. And so we put together that commercial lien against the 12 Federal Reserve banks in a timely manner because, being a privately owned operation, the Federal Reserve banks were due to recharter in January of 2013. And with that huge lien in place, they couldn't recharter. And so as a central bank, their function had to be melded into the function of the United States Treasury, the old Treasury. That's not to say that the old Treasury was any better than the Fed. But anyway, that's the first thing that happened. And then, you know, as we've spoken of in the past about one of the purposes of what's called the RV, the revaluation of currencies, was to destroy the control by the central banks, you know, in the various countries who were simply raping the planet. So it's been kind of a long process of time. You know, I mean, we would do certain things here and certain things there. And then eventually those things cascade into other things. So, you know, I feel like that, you know, for my efforts, feeble as they may be, that I at least deserve a merit badge for it, don't you think?
yeah. Well, you're the Honorable Winston Trout, and I just
Oh
thought I
yeah,
was talking to a
oh yeah,
hillbilly every week, an
oh yeah.
honorable hillbilly at that. Thank you, Winston, on behalf of, you know,
Well, yeah,
everyone.
like I
Thank you so
say,
much for.
yeah, we've talked about some of these things in the past, and so today what I wanted to do was give a history of it as a build-up, you know, to here we are at the end of the Mayan calendar, folks. And so today being the significant day that it is, I thought I would at least go over more of the history so that people can understand. And again, I encourage them to go, hey, all the listeners, I mean, after you get done listening to this, go listen
Right.
to that interview with Keith Scott and Ethan Fox, and you'll learn ever so much more. Keith lays it out. You know, if anybody knows anything about it, Keith knows about it. He'll tell you things about historical events and so forth in that interview that you'll never hear anyplace else. See, you know, Keith's an interesting fella. I mean, I really like him and everything, but he is well trusted in the Asian community. And he told me that he's one of 6 white men that were ever allowed to read Hirohito's personal journal. So if there's anybody on the planet that knows the history of all these things, it's Keith. And so that interview, he exposes, you know, many elements that people would never hear about. They're not in history books, folks.
Right.
We're dealing with real live people who are making history, but also exposing some of the things that have not been written of and probably never will be.
Well, they can watch Goldfish University.
Go, go GoldFish University and
There
so
we
forth.
go.
Yeah. So anyway, just briefly, I've tried to expose some of these histories for people's education, gone over a few things, kind of brought us up to current events. And then, like I say, here we are on the 22nd of December, and we're looking for the 23rd of December because we know we're going toward the light. We're going to have more daylight here in the Northern Hemisphere, so we're going toward the light, and we're going into something new. We have indications of what this new world is going to be like, but it's certainly not going to be like the old one. We've had huge energy bombarding the planet here, starting I think on the what was the 18th to continue through today. And when we come out the other side of this solstice, at the end of the Mayan calendar, everybody was worried about and so forth. Because again, I've shown you the interconnection between the Mayans and Solo Bawe. I mean, and going all the way back to King Solomon's gold. And again, King Solomon being the king of Judah, go look at the patriarchal blessings that were given to the 12 tribes, and look particularly at what was pronounced upon Judah. And in essence, they would have control of government until Shiloh comes. So go back and study your Old Testament a little bit, and I think you'd be well served to do so. So that's pretty much my presentation. Like I say, it looks like we're kind of pretty much keeping it within the 2 hours. We don't want to go on so much that we bore people to death. So 2 hours is about as long as I can handle it anyway.
Well,
But in any
Winston,
event, we kind of come to the end of it.
no, I mean, this is the most important 2 hours that anyone can invest in their life if they want to understand, why we are where we are on this planet at this time, and what the the plan was, how much planning and how far and widespread, how much cooperation there was to fulfill this plan, and then to see how things went so wrong and where we need to go uh, to finally have peace and prosperity on this planet. We have to understand what caused the war and what caused the hijacking of this plan to
Yeah.
begin with.
Uh-huh.
We can't move forward if we don't understand how the pitfalls happened in the past, so we don't repeat them. So there's
Yes.
so incredibly valuable what you've brought to our GoldFish students today.
Well, that's the
GoldFish
duty of the
University.
Grand Master.
You Sanded Hillbillies. Hey,
Well,
Winston, you gave me an apprentice appointment, didn't you? You gave me an apprentice. Uh, um,
not yet. You still haven't demonstrated ham bone, so I'm going to have to hold you back.
he's giving me apprentice membership.
Well, here's a good point for people to consider. And that is, as we went through this history, looked at all these agreements, looked at all these, really highfalutin things that go on. Isn't it nice to know that we can relate that to just a normal, that's the right word, just to a regular guy?
Sure.
I didn't go looking for these things.
Well, that's why they chose
They
you,
they were
Winston.
brought to me. And so, isn't it interesting, or isn't it, I don't know, isn't it a good thing that just a regular guy has been involved in all these things? I mean, like I say, I'm still wearing blue jeans and flannel shirts, for crying out loud. But to be involved in some of these things and to be able to bring these things to people that would normally never hear of it or consider it. And so I can comment, I can bring some of these things to your attention, partly because I've been involved in it. And I'm just, like I say, I'm wearing flannel shirts and blue jeans, folks.
The unassuming. You had to be unassuming, Winston.
I guess that's what it was.
Yeah.
But in any event, my message is one of encouragement. We have these things, they're being corrected. we're coming into a new paradigm here, starting today or tomorrow. Crying out loud, folks, raise your spirits, be of good hope, be of good cheer, because the things that we would like, to make it as good as possible for as many as possible.
Mm.
That's what we're trying to do. And so it's been a dogfight. It's been a regular dogfight for a long time. People have lost their lives. People have been assassinated. Like I say, this attorney that did the apostille on my appointment from Dr. Dan, he was assassinated. He was shot dead. Dr. Dan, they tried to poison him to death. And I have had in this experience, close friends who were assassinated, dead. Now, how it is that I managed to live through all this, I don't know. But it looks like we broke over onto the other side now. So now we're looking for a little bit better treatment and a little bit better things to happen to us. So be of good cheer, and don't forget those who have, in fact. We talk about our veterans and this, that, and the other. But this other war that we have been involved in for the financial control on the planet also has many fallen heroes, most of whom you'll never know or never hear their names. But just think about that, what effort has gone into it.
Well, Winston, thank you, because you've been part of this, and I don't know. I mean, on behalf of everyone who can't communicate to you and express their gratitude, thank you for what you've done, for all the people who have been involved, as you said, many unsung heroes whose names may never be known. If it isn't for you, Winston, bringing those names onto the GoldFish report and explaining their role and how significant their role was in this process, we have to be grateful, very grateful, for those who have tried, and whether or not they were able to carry out what what their plan was, what they tried to accomplish for the best for humanity, for this overall plan. We thank all of them, even in our spirit, and I'm sure they'll feel that gratitude wherever they are.
Yeah,
They're just a dimension away,
that's true.
They just lost their suit.
Yeah. Well, again, like I say, God, God's blessings to everybody, to listen to these things, however you consider God or whatever, and be of good cheer, be of good hope. And if you want to learn how to start a fight, go back and review the first few minutes.
Right, it's not too late, because holiday time's coming. We still have that Christmas, folks. We still have that Christmas dinner still yet. Winston, you're going to start some fights, Winston.
Yeah, we started with a laugh, and it's only appropriate we end with one. So we just have to have a little bit of humor to make things go down. So anyway, that's all I have for today, and I appreciate your efforts to put these things out. So thank you very much.
Well, it's a pleasure, Winston. I'm honored, really, being in front of my honorable friend, Winston Shroud. So thank you so much. And
Grandmaster.
Grandmaster, sorry. So, folks, we wish everyone who observes a very Merry Christmas. It's only a couple days away. We hope everybody has, a new, renewed hope, as Winston has expressed. And I think that we're going to be off to a very interesting 2018. What do you think, Winston, for the new year?
Yeah, it's going to be a good one.
Yeah. So I think we have one more country roads. My screen keeps flashing for some reason. I don't know why. But we have one more country roads before the new year. So we'll see what we'll be doing on that. Might be a special one we'll do. We'll see.
Great.
And I just want to thank you again, Winston, really. It's been a pleasure doing all of these with you. And wish all of your family, happy holidays, Merry Christmas. And to all of our viewers out there, I just want to remind you that Facebook has really, really dug their heels in and have censored us quite a bit on Facebook, on our Goldfish Report news page, the whole news page, the whole Goldfish Report news page on Facebook, although it's still there, it's extremely censored. So what we ask all of, and YouTube, fortunately, since we don't monetize, the only way we can do that and keep bringing these incredible interviews and reports to you is through viewer support, which we ask all of our viewers to remember this time of year, to show your appreciation for what we do and bring to you through making a donation to Goldfish Report. So by doing that, we're able to keep this information coming to you. We also want to make sure all of our viewers know that we appreciate your comments. We appreciate the links of the stories that you send to us. There's so many people to thank that I don't have the list appropriate, but there's many who I wish to show my appreciation to. But again, try to share these reports, and not just today's report, all of our Goldfish reports, on websites, on Facebook in your groups, on other YouTube channels and other social media milieu, because we need to have this spread globally. And we need to really ramp up the effort of all of the listeners out there to participate, as Winston has said in the past, and do your share to spread this information globally, so we can get this information to people who have the right to know, and who are in other countries and may not have access. Other countries are very censored in terms of what access they have to the internet, and especially to certain channels. So again, since we don't monetize, we don't exactly hit the red flags that other channels may raise to these social media platforms. But we are impacted. There's no question. I mean, we've had over 100,000 viewers weekly on the news site, the Facebook news site, and they have severely censored that to lower than 30,000. So on a weekly basis. And we know that our numbers are much higher. I get the notifications from people who comment, and we just, there's thousands of people. It's a lot. And I know that you can do your part by spreading this and passing it along, sharing it, like I said, on a page, sharing it with I know that there's people out there that have been bootlegging our videos. And you are permitted to do that, because it's about the information, folks. We're not here to make money. We don't make money. I mean, I don't. If we get a few contributions to pay for all the, subscriptions that we have in order to keep these services and keep Goldfish Report going, then at least, that eases the burden. But this is really something you can do to help participate and do your part. If you can't make a financial contribution, you can share this information and spread it on Facebook and your other social media. We do have Twitter, so please follow us on Twitter, follow us on our Goldfish Report Facebook page, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, you can follow us always on our WordPress blog as well. But to make that contribution, you would go to the goldfishreport.com, and the first page there, the homepage, you could do that. The website is not completely up to date. I'm going to be making some major changes in terms of archiving our reports, which are on YouTube. But it's really become very cumbersome to duplicate that on the website, which is not entirely necessary. So we're relying on YouTube right now for our viewers to go for our latest and most up-to-date Goldfish reports. And having said that, I just want to thank you all for viewing and for your wonderful comments. And Winston, as always, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure, my friend.
Well, are we having a good time?
Oh, we're having a good time.
Well, that's all we ever ask, folks. If you're having a good time, then we'll keep doing it. And if there ever comes a time, when you're not having a good time with all this, then there's no reason for me to keep talking.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really up to the viewers to keep it going if they want it to keep going. So we want to tell everyone how much we appreciate your viewing. And please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And having said that, we'll see you all next week after a wonderful holiday, and another POTUS report next week, and a special top 10. We're going to have so much coming up next week, folks. So get ready and have a happy holiday, and we'll see you all next time.
Okay, bye, y'all. See you next time.
This concludes this edition of the Goldfish Report.